We all make lists. You have your grocery list, maybe a list of goals you'd like to accomplish. Thanksgiving is coming up, so you have your Thanksgiving list, and then you just have your normal day-to-day to-do list. But for some people, a list can actually save a life. On today's episode of the Live, Learn, and Play podcast, we talk with Ruby Peeler's mom, Betsy, as she tells her daughter's story about a list she never expected her child to be on. The Live, Learn, and Play podcast talks about the people, places, and programs here at Arkansas Children's. Please rate and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And now, here's Betsy. So today on this episode of the Live, Learn, and Play podcast, I'm joined by Betsy Peeler, and she is Ruby's mom, and Ruby is a sweet little girl. We've done some patient stories on her, and I've gotten to see her in action, and she's just adorable. So we want to hear more about Ruby and your journey with Arkansas Children's. So if we could maybe just start at the beginning, what brought you to Arkansas Children's in the first place?
Well, just to give a little backstory here, Ruby was, she's my second child, and she was a healthy term baby. I had a miscarriage prior to her pregnancy, so I had great prenatal care with this one. You know, you're just hypervigilant after something like that. After you go through a miscarriage, and so we, had great prenatal care. And, all my ultrasounds were normal and did not have any, anything to worry about with her delivery and even as through her infancy. But we did start to notice around 15 months or so that her growth really slowed down. And so up until that point, we had met all of our milestones and she was growing appropriately. She was small, but, I am not particularly a tall person or a large person. And my husband is sort of an outlier. He is very tall, but, he's kind of the outlier in his family. So anyhow, up until that point, she had met all of our milestones and was growing appropriately. But around the 15-month mark, we noticed that her growth really did decline. And so my pediatrician did some lab work, and we noticed that she was anemic. So we started her on some iron and checked those levels again in a few months, and they did not come up. And so that was cause for concern.
So why was there a cause for concern at that point?
Well, she was anemic, and so we didn't really have a cause for that. We didn't know why she was anemic, and the way her blood cells looked under a microscope were atypical. And so we wanted to come and dig into that a little bit further, and that's what led us to Children's. We thought primarily that it was going to be an anemia problem. We didn't foresee any sort of other problems with any other systems in her body. So our pediatrician referred us here to see Dr. Becton in the hematology oncology clinic. So that was our first appointment here. And we did some further lab work that day, and we found out that she did not have a primary blood problem, but that her kidneys were failing. And up until that point, we didn't really have any clue that had happened or that it was going on in her body. Looking back, I did notice some things that in hindsight are clear that, there were some signs.
What type of signs were you seeing?
Well, it's the weird things that you notice as a mother. So, I noticed that her, with Sam, my oldest child, I noticed that he grew in specific ways, like his feet grew quickly. And I was always having to trim his nails. With Ruby, I didn't have to do those things. And those are small things, but they're things that I noticed. Like I noticed that her nails weren't growing and that her height wasn't growing, that all these clothes that we had inherited from my niece, she wasn't growing into. I noticed that her feet weren't growing. So those were some subtle signs that looking back, I can see, okay, that was probably her kidney starting to fail, and it just showed in those outward ways. Ruby was also kind of a fussier baby compared to Sam, who was just a dream. She was just a little bit more challenging to get to eat, one. Two, she was just more fussy as a baby growing up, too. So looking back, those were some signs that were, pretty clear looking back, that she was just not feeling well and that her kidneys were not working. She was just fussy and didn't want to eat. We thought maybe she was just picky eater, as most toddlers can go through those phases.
Right, which is normal, but like you said, you saw some signs. Take us back to that first meeting with Dr. Becton and then what you walked away with.
So we just thought that we would have to continue her iron supplementation that we had started on, that, maybe we would have some just follow-up there. But when he came in with the lab values that indicated that she was in renal failure, I immediately knew. My husband was with me. He travels a lot, but he was able to be with me that day, and we both just were in shock. We had no idea that this was coming. So we really had to shift gears that day. We had to kind of digest what they were telling us, and I immediately knew that there was going to be a big life change for her. And so that was the main thing that I had to work through that day, was that, her life moving forward would be very different.
From that meeting, you knew life was going to be different from that point on. How did the team prepare you at Arkansas Children's, and what were the next steps?
Well, that day, we did immediately meet with our nephrologist, Dr. Ellis, and she has since retired, and we miss her terribly. But we met with Dr. Ellis that day, and she wanted to admit us to go ahead and start working on some of the things that were going to be the most immediate changes. So we had to make a pretty big change in her diet, and then also adding some medications to kind of help her kidneys treat the signs of her renal dysfunction at that point. So we did have to be admitted at that point, and then just make some goals as far as her care. So moving forward, one thing that we really had to work on was her growth. And to receive a kidney transplant, you have to be of a certain size, and she was not there. She was just very small. And so we did have to make some goals for her growth and figure out how to get there. So her nutrition was the main thing that we wanted to focus on. Obviously, her preserving her kidney function as well. It's what little function she had left. And then getting her to a weight and size to where she could receive a donor kidney. So at the time, when we started her workup towards a kidney transplant, we had the goal of my husband donating to her. He, like I said before, is a little bit bigger. He's a bigger man, 6'4", and it was almost impossible to think that his kidney would fit into Ruby's little body. So we did have to work on her growth and nutrition. So the biggest concern or way to figure out how we were going to do that was, would she need some supplemental formula through either an NG tube or a button? And so we talked with our nutritionist and with Dr. Ellis and decided to move forward with a G tube. And that to me was frightening, just because it was her first major surgery. She had never had to have surgery before. And so I didn't want her to have to go through the trauma of having an NG tube placed. It's very traumatic for a child. And she was somewhat active at this point, and so the thought of her pulling that out and having to re-put it down was a nightmare for me.
How old is Ruby at this point? So
she was diagnosed at 18 months, and this was right before her second birthday. So She was almost 2. So we could reason with her a little bit, but not that much.
No.
So the first big, milestone was to get that button placed. And when we did that, obviously here at Children's, and it went very well. We had received great care there, and just stayed overnight just to make sure that she would tolerate the formula and that the button healed up okay. And she had that until, shortly after her transplant. So we were able to give her good nutrition using that button.
And I'm just curious, timeline-wise, did you have to wait till she got up to a certain weight before you got on the list?
Yes.
Okay, so you couldn't get on the list and say, we're going to do this.
Yeah, okay. we wanted to get her to the best place physically before we listed her on the deceased donor list, which was more of a formality at that point. So my husband had the whole $1 million workup to, donate his kidney to her. I had not met the surgeon yet, and so I wanted to just meet him and see who was going to be doing the surgery on Ruby. So there was a lot that went into that.
So you're meeting the surgeon thinking that your husband was going to donate the kidney.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And then a surgery was planned, or?
Yes, we had a surgery booked, and we already had, an OR time for Michael, an OR time for Ruby, and we kind of had that all orchestrated on how that was going to work. And then shortly after that meeting, Dr. Ellis said, well, let's go ahead and just list her on the deceased donor registry to see if a donor kidney were to become available, we would be ready. At this point, she had been on dialysis about 8 months, and we did that at home every night, and so that was a big to-do as well.
Okay, Betsy, so you have a surgery date, you're on the kidney waiting list, you're doing dialysis. What was life like at home while you were waiting for a kidney?
It was very challenging. It was, we did the dialysis every night. We would, get her in bed, and while she slept, we would give her the dialysis treatment and then also give her her nighttime feeds. And so she would get some good nutrition, while she was also getting her dialysis. And then in the morning, we would get up and she would play and, have a pretty normal day for the most part. And we continued that just day-to-day routine while trying to keep things somewhat normal. And we would come up for appointments with Dr. Ellis and the whole team about every month just to follow her growth and nutrition. And, at that point we had listed her on the deceased donor list, all the while thinking that Michael would donate his kidney to Ruby. But we did get a call from Dr. Ellis and Sharon, our transplant coordinator, around the 10th of November, and they said that they had a kidney available for Ruby that was a deceased donor. And we didn't know much about the donor other than just a few key points. And at that point, it was just sort of a waiting game. We had to do some final testing of the kidney to make sure that it was the right size and the right antibodies that wouldn't interact with Ruby's body. And so we just made preparations that day. My husband was in New Orleans. He travels a lot. And so I called him and told him the news, which was a huge shift for him as well. He had to drive home and made it home in time for us to be admitted and for her to receive her last dialysis treatment up here at Children's. And we spent that night just preparing and kind of waiting, doing some final preparations with her lab work and making sure that everything was ready to go. And then on the morning of transplant, my whole family came up and we just kind of just gathered around each other and prepared for the big day.
So before we talk about surgery day, which was a big day, like you said, I think just the shift for your husband as well, going from being someone who's going to donate to watching his little girl have surgery. What was that transition like for him? Because he was prepared for surgery and now it's out of his hands.
Yes. well, so much of this journey we have had to really just turn over to the medical team. We just have had to really trust in their guidance. And he very much so has kind of made the shift with me to really just trust in what they say. And he's I remember him telling me, if you think this is right and this is what we should do, then let's proceed that way. With a donor kidney, we both prayed going into it that if a donor kidney were to become available, that it was a true gift from God, and we would just take it as that.
So for those of you who don't know, Betsy is used to being in the hospital. You are a nurse practitioner in our neonatal intensive care unit here at Arkansas Children's. So you are used to the lingo, you're used to what goes on inside the hospital. But tell us what it was like seeing it through the lens of a parent.
It was very different, very different. When she was first diagnosed, my mind was flooded with all the changes that were coming, the what ifs. I just knew just enough about renal failure and about, the road that she was going to have to face, that it was overwhelming to me. And I can think of one instance that I really had to put down my nurse practitioner hat. And it was on the first hospitalization, right after we had found out that she was in renal failure. One of the nurses came in and she saw that I was visibly upset, just kind of going through all the emotions and all the just trying to process everything that we had just heard about. And she said, "You're just going to have to be your mommy. You're just going to have to put all of that medical knowledge aside and just be your mommy." And it seems so simple, and it really hit home with me. And that's when I really put my faith in our medical team, and just was there for Ruby in the best way that I knew how, and to love her and to help her through all of these changes. That's when I knew I'm just going to have to be your mom and put the nurse practitioner hat aside.
So once you did that, I think that will, when it came time for surgery day, you're taking off your nurse's hat and put on the mommy hat. What was surgery day like for your family?
It was very, very emotional and a lot to process. When you receive a gift like that donor kidney, just was so humbling, just to receive a gift like that from somebody that you don't even know, was just very powerful and very humbling for all of us. So we just all sat together and just, waited. A lot of it is waiting, which you don't really realize. Sharon, our transplant coordinator, tried to prep us a little bit that a lot of it is just hurry up and wait. And so there are a lot of little details that go on behind the scenes, I'm sure, in preparation for making the day go smoothly. So a lot of it was just taking in the moment and just trying to be present with Ruby and knowing that her little body was going to change so much from this gift, this wonderful kidney that she had received. And so once it was time to take her back to receive her kidney, my sister was able to walk back with us, and she's also a physician. So that was really special, just to be able to spend that time together as a family moving forward. And Michael and I, said our goodbyes and our prayers over her as she went back to the OR, and then we just waited. And the OR itself, the OR time was very smooth. They would come out and give us updates, the transplant coordinators, and I think the biggest problem they had during the case was music selection. So that was a relief to me, knowing that knowing all the things that could have happened or gone wrong, that they didn't, and that everything went very smoothly.
So, so after the surgery, what kind of plan did you have in place for recovery? And then what were some of your expectations after surgery?
Well, I did know that she would be in the PICU for a few days, and our stay there was amazing. The nurses were so good and patient, and just took excellent care of her. And again, it allowed me to take off that practitioner hat and just be there and be her mommy and hold her hand. And, you know, she didn't really understand what was going on with her body. And so, you know, for me to be able to be there and be fully present with her and not worry about any of the medical things, we just rejoiced in the way that her lab started to turn around immediately. That was amazing to me, was that her kidney functions were just normal, and it was a shock to me in a good way. You know, we were just so pleased that everything went as well as it did.
What were some of the changes that you noticed, even in her, maybe her mood or her activity? Was it completely different?
It was, almost immediately. She, you could tell she just felt better. You know, looking back, I think she was so fussy because she felt bad, and she could not vocalize that. You know, it's hard for a toddler to vocalize anything, let alone, I don't feel good. So after her transplant, her growth took off, her eating took off. She wanted to eat M&Ms in the post-operative period, which was really strange to me, but, you know, just her little personality really started to shine through.
So we always like to talk about the patient experience here at Arkansas Children's is different because it's a children's hospital, and the team did something special for Ruby before discharge, before she was going home, and had a special party for her. Tell us more about that.
Yes, her kidney party. At the end of her transplant hospitalization, we had a kidney party for Ruby, and it was a great way for the whole team to get together and really celebrate her kidney, and how it was a great way to end that hospitalization with the whole team. So it was Dr. Ellis and her nephrologist and the transplant coordinators, Sharon and Brian, and of course, my whole family, the dietitian, Christine, who helped us through, you know, all of those growth milestones and challenges that we had there at the beginning. It was just a great way for all of us to get together and celebrate. And there was cake involved, and we sang Happy Kidney, like happy birthday. And it was just a great way to all get together and really celebrate Ruby.
What were some of the emotions you were going through that day?
I do remember being tired because it was at the end of her hospitalization, but at the same time, very excited and ready for her to be able to come home and really start her new life with this new kidney that she had received. I remember also loving to have my whole family there again too, and some of the other medical professionals that, you know, are friends of mine in the hospital were there too. And so it was just a great way to be able to celebrate all together.
So now Ruby is 4, almost 5.
Yes, her birthday is on December 18th.
So what is life like now, and what are some milestones that you're looking forward to?
There's so many. She is doing very well. We are so pleased with her progress, and some of the biggest milestones are the ones that you can see on the computer screen on the follow-up visits, because her growth has just really taken off. She's just doing so well, gaining weight. She's just thriving. She started pre-K in the fall and loves that. She just loves to go to school and be with other kids. She's just so funny. She comes home and tells me these stories of her day. And even this morning, as we were getting ready, she was talking about hedgehogs and how they were nocturnal and just all this funny anecdotal stuff that she's just hilarious. She's so much fun to be around, and she's very independent and likes to do things on her own, and so we try to really help her do those things. But she's just a lot of fun, doing great, doing very well. We're very blessed.
So that's good to hear that she is growing into a little independent lady. What does the future look like for Ruby?
We do have follow-up here at Children's. We follow up at least every month with labs. And then about every 2 months we come back to see her nephrologist, Dr. Rana Bothu. And she just looks at her kidney function, makes sure everything is still okay, and follows her growth. We did get her button out. That was something that was very exciting too, that she was able to take in enough nutrition and things like that. That was a big milestone as well.
So you mentioned that she got her button out. What exactly does that mean?
So she had her G-tube, which we refer to as her button, just as a little bit more of a kid-friendly word. But she was able to take all of her nutrition in and did not need any supplemental like feeds or formula, that she was able to take all of her nutrition by mouth. And so it was a big milestone for us to have that removed, because it was kind of the first major surgery that she had. So for us, it was just a big celebration to be able to take that out. And she had it removed just before the summertime, and so we were able to go swimming and do some of the things that we weren't able to do when she had that in. You can swim with a button, but it was just a big milestone, and it happened right around summer, so it was the perfect timing.
Excellent. And then so you've talked about you're going to have to follow up here at Arkansas Children's for a while until Ruby reaches...
Yes. So we do have follow-up at least every month, just to follow her kidney function and make sure that everything is still looking good. And we meet with a transplant coordinator, and they just make sure that everything is still progressing the way it should, that her growth is still good, and that she's still meeting all of her milestones.
So Thanksgiving is right around the corner. What are you thankful for this Thanksgiving?
Oh, we're so very thankful for Ruby's new kidney and for a little bit more normalcy in our family. It just is such a gift to watch her grow and progress like a normal kid. Just for her to be able to be around other children and just enjoy life. It is truly a gift. We are so very thankful for her.
Well, Betsy, thank you for sharing your story and Ruby's story, and happy early birthday to Ruby. We hope you have happy holidays with your family.
Thank you, Rebecca. Appreciate it.
What a great story. And it's so neat to hear that Ruby is almost 5, and according to her mom, is a little firecracker and is doing really well. So we appreciate Betsy and her time and sharing Ruby's story with us. Thank you for listening. Please rate and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We'll be back next month with another story from Arkansas Children's, and a happy holidays to all our listeners.